Hello, hello. Welcome to tonight's safety seminar on advanced RPAS certifications. My name is Karen Chung. I'm the Director of National Programs for COPA. We're very excited to have you here tonight. You can see we have some others in the virtual stage here. Before I get them to introduce themselves, I'm going to ask all those in the room to use the chat on the right side of your screen if you're on a computer. To introduce yourself, tell us where you're coming from, who are looking to meet the requirements of the recurrent training that's mandatory from your TC certifications. This does qualify for the 24-month training itself. We will be sending you out a certificate so that you can keep it for records in the case that you are audited. Very good. We're seeing some Ottawa, Calgary. Ooh, I heard that the fall foliage is done out in Alberta. So just to introduce themselves. So Ian, could you tell us a little bit of your aviation background?
Yeah, so I started my aviation career as a commercial helicopter pilot, flying originally the Bell 47 and then the Jet Ranger and the EC-120 and the A-Star. And then kind of got into drones. I'd been in drones a little bit before being a pilot, but of course, being the kind of guy that goes to Best Buy for fun on the weekends, it was a natural kind of transition into flying.
I started my career in aviation with crewed aircraft. So I was flying gliders at 16, and then I got my private pilot's license. I'm still flying gliders with the cadets on the weekend and in the summer. And so in 2014, we started a drone operation company out of Montreal in Quebec City. And now lately I've been also very involved with Aerial Evolution Association of Canada as the flight safety officer. And I'm trying to I am pushing very hard.
Chrome browser. It's the optimal browser to use. I've used my phone in the past as well. I'm going to turn my camera off shortly as soon as Ian starts his presentation. So that should help with any lagging. So with that, Ian, I do invite you to get us started on tonight's core topic around advanced RPAS certifications.
You bet. That sounds great. All right, I'm going to turn on the presentation here and hopefully I press the right button. And let's see here, start. All right, so advanced drone operations. So very quickly, I'll introduce who I am. I'm from Coastal Drone Co. We're an online on-demand drone training provider that serves across Canada. And we consist of fixed wing and rotary wing pilots, including myself and my partners. And let's dig in a little bit here. We're going to be talking tonight about advanced operations as well. So Coastal Drones, founded in 2016, we initially started as an in-house provider for training and certification for an agency media company. And we recognized very quickly that there was huge demand for that knowledge and skill set to provide assistance with SFOCs or special flight operation certificates for other people that wanted to get into commercial drone operations. So that continued all the way up until about late 2018. And then in 2019, the laws changed so that you could have regular commercial operations without an SFOC. We transitioned our platform to an online training platform, and we deliver ground school for both the basic and the advanced online exam for Transport Canada. Through 2019 on to today, we've got retail partnerships across Canada. If you buy a drone at Best Buy, you can pair that with our course. If you search out through other retailers like London Drugs, you can also purchase our course through them as well. And in 2021, we launched the Remote Pilot Network, which is a network to broker jobs between drone pilots and third parties that are looking for aerial data on demand. We also launched our Coastal Community, which is a over 500 members at this point, but it's an online community that you can engage with myself and our team. We have weekly Zoom calls similar to this. We talk about advanced topics, and then you also get access to our early access or insider content like our long format podcasts. Our mission, like I said, is to make the skies as safe and efficient as possible by providing online training. And we also back that up with in-person training and the in-person flight review, which is required for the Advanced Operations Certificate. We also broker customer demand with professional drone pilots through our remote pilot network. And we support and serve the industry, and we continue to do consultation and guidance for advanced operations or for SFOCs if you need to operate outside of a normal advanced environment. So quick about the drone industry. I know there's probably some existing advanced pilots or basic pilots or people that are interested in getting into drones. So as I mentioned, in 2019, the drone rules changed. So now you have a regular structure that you can go out and fly either for fun or commercially without requiring a special flight operations certificate. There's currently over 70,000 certified drone pilots as of around the summer, and about 10% of those drone pilots go on to get their advanced pilot certificate, which is a two-step process. And I'll go more into that in a bit here. There's over 63,000 drones registered in Canada, and those are drones weighing anywhere from 250 grams all the way up to hundreds of kilograms. The global industry already, as of last year, was valued at $23 billion and growing. I just saw a Drone Industry Insights poster come out yesterday that had well over 300 different logos. It was really crammed in there. So things are getting pretty crazy in the industry. So Transport Canada regulates and licenses drones under a regular structure that's based on risk. Unlike fixed wing and rotary wing operations, which are based on either recreational, private, or commercial operations up to transport category, drones are licensed based on how much they weigh and what proximity to risk they have. So if you look at the chart, you'll see the bottom left corner is a low risk environment. It's considered either under 250 grams, which is the micro drone category that is unlicensed and unregistered. Or if it weighs more than 250 grams, but less than 25 kilograms, you'll have the basic or advanced operations. Those basic or advanced are going to be based on proximity to people, airports, and heliports. If you need to fly beyond visual line of sight, you're still going to need to require a SFOC or a Special Operations Flight Certificate. And or if the drone weighs more than 25 kilograms, which is the normal weight category for a small drone, you would also require a SFOC. So types of drones that are out in the market right now, you have ornithopters or flapping wings. There's a company out of Alberta, Area Analytics, that specializes in birds of prey, scaring them off with drones that look just like this. That is actually their drone. There's a traditional multi-rotor that you'd see, the quad or hexacopter or octocopter like a Phantom. There's traditional airplane fixed wing that take off on a runway or a hard surface. And then there's also convertible drones that can take off vertically and then transition into forward flight to be more efficient. All of these are colloquially considered drones. They're all within that 250 to 25 kilogram category. I usually refer to them as drones. So if I say drone, I mean any one of these aircraft in this category. It's an unmanned or uncrewed, remotely piloted aircraft, or RPAS. Again, we talked about weight classes briefly before, but we have the micro category, which is the up to 249 gram category. A great example of this is the DJI Mini series. They're very capable drones. They have 4K cameras. They're amazing capability, and they're under that licensing or weight category cutoff that they don't require you to have a pilot certificate or register the drone. However, they have limitations. They're not going to be as good in high wind conditions. They may not have as good of a camera. They might not have obstacle avoidance or the battery endurance that a larger drone would have. So there are some trade-offs. The small drones category is the meat and potatoes of the RPAS industry right now. It's 250 grams to 25 kilograms. If you don't have a certificate, you cannot fly them. If you don't register the drone, you cannot fly it. And then any drones that are beyond that weight category, we refer to them as heavy lift. Agriculture is an excellent example of this. There's a lot of spray drones that are coming onto the market and have been on the market for a while that are used for precision agriculture and aerial application. they typically start at somewhere around 20 to 30 kilograms before you add the payload to the drone or the aerial application liquid. So if you're getting into drones and you're not already in them, there's some things to consider about choosing the right drone. Weight definitely has a big factor because it'll determine what license or certification you need, but it also determines the kind of performance it has. So the bigger the drones are, typically they have much better wind resistance. They might have the ability to fly in foul weather or rain or precipitation, and they might have better hovering accuracy. They might have a better GPS system. The other thing to consider is the kind of safety assurance declaration. So many drones that are manufactured in Canada have what's called a manufacturer's safety assurance declaration, which permits it to either fly in controlled airspace, which is near an airport, near people, which is closer than 100 feet horizontally, or over people, which is closer than 16.5 feet horizontally. And then the final consideration is definitely the sensor, the payload that the drone is carrying. Why is the drone in the air? Well, the sensor size could be determined by the size of the drone. So if it's a mini series or a micro drone, it might have a sensor or a camera that's about the same size as your phone. Whereas a more professional drone like the DJI Mavic 3 or the Autel Evo series has a 1/2 inch or even a micro 4/3, which is more like a point and shoot or a larger camera. Then resolution obviously matters based on if you're doing mapping or high resolution photography. And then you might be considering what spectrum of light the sensors are working in. Is it visible light or RGB? Is it infrared? Or is it maybe other thermal tech that you're using? And then some drones have multiple fields of view. Like they could have a telephoto lens or for long or zoom, or they could have a wide angle lens. So there's 3 main categories based on that chart. And then these are the things that you can or can't do in the operations of that category. The micro drone category, as I said, it is unlicensed and unregistered. However, it's still regulated. There's the blue box here applies to all 3 categories is the golden rule of drones. It's CARS 900.06. That's the don't be a hazard to any person, property, or aircraft rule, or don't be an idiot. And also applies to all 3 operations is the CYR restriction. Drones are considered aircraft, just like any helicopter or airplane or anything else. They cannot enter Class F restricted airspace without permission from the airspace operator or user agency. So a good example of Class F restricted airspace is the airspace surrounding wildfires or prisons. There are some recommendations that are listed in the Transport Canada Aviation Information Manual and the RPA chapter in Section 2. And they're recommendations, they're not hard and fast rules. So things like you should stay below 400 feet above ground. It's not a hard and fast rule for micro drones, but it is a strong recommendation based on being in compliance with the safety rule that is the golden rule of all drones. Moving into normal size drones, basic operations, you still cannot fly in controlled airspace. You can't fly closer than 100 feet from people. You cannot fly closer than 3 nautical miles from an airport, and you cannot fly closer than 1 nautical mile from heliport. So for today, we're talking about advanced operations. You can fly in controlled airspace and over people and closer to the airports and heliports. But most importantly, it's the controlled airspace and over people are based on that safety assurance declaration that we were talking about before. There's a combination of both you, the pilot, having the right certification and the drone having the right safety assurance declaration or technical ability to fly in controlled airspace. So I've already talked about everything I just said here, so I always do this with this slide, but again, the CARS 900.06, the don't be an idiot rule is important. I'll reiterate it again. You cannot fly a micro drone in a CYR or Class F restricted airspace. These will come up by automatic issuance if it's a wildfire, like I said. They will also be issued by NOTAM, or there may be permanent established CYRs surrounding prisons or military danger areas. And it's always a good idea to read the AIM. The latest issue just came out October 4th, I think it was, and refer to the recommended or rules of thumb that are published in the AIM for micro drone operations. So like I said, where we can fly, we're looking at advanced operations today. So we'll start digging in on that. We can fly, as long as the drone can do it, in controlled airspace, less than 3 nautical miles from an airport, less than 1 nautical mile from a heliport, greater than 16.5 feet from bystanders, which are people not involved in operation, and over people if the drone has a safety assurance declaration. That means most likely it's either a fixed wing drone that has capability to fly away, or if it's a multi-rotor, it has a parachute to prevent it from seriously injuring or causing a fatal accident. SFOC can be typically requiring or recommended to have an advanced operations certificate. There are circumstances where you might be able to fly under a basic certificate under an SFOC, but there's a very high knowledge requirement and procedural process to go through to apply for an SFOC. So you're best equipped to make it through the application process for that SFOC with the knowledge provided by holding an advanced certificate. It's more a recommendation. So look at the map of Canada. This is from an RPAS selection tool. This is called the NRC Site Selection Tool. And it shows you all the airspace blocks in Canada as relevant to drone operators. You'll see large areas of orange, which are national parks. You'll see large areas of yellow and red obviously being areas that you can't fly at their basic or advanced. And then down in the urban areas, you'll see more red as we dig in here. That is controlled airspace. So this controlled airspace, you can only be flown in with an advanced pilot certificate, and your drone must have a safety assurance declaration for controlled airspace. Not all drones have it. It varies, but it's a technical requirement based on having a GPS and the ability to display telemetry and then have a minimum level of accuracy. So we're going to dig in a little bit on this controlled airspace for advanced operations. And we'll notice, so this is surrounding Pearson here. We've got controlled airspace all over the place here. And then we've got these yellow pill-shaped. These are surrounding uncontrolled aerodromes that are uncertified aerodromes that are registered in the CFS. If we dig in, I'll go back one. If we want to fly in this controlled airspace, we must use an app called Nav Drone.
Hey, Ian, I just jump in there. There was a quick question.
Sure. Sorry, I didn't see chat there.
This is from Michael, who asked, you had referenced other thermal imaging besides infrared. Could you expand on what that means?
Well, like using I'm not a thermographer. So I know that there's multiple types of thermal sensors. There's radiometric and uncooled, as well as different types, is more what I meant with that in that regard there.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for the clarification.
Sure. And corona cameras, I think, is the other type that you can use as well. So for measuring the UV arc between bad insulators on power line inspection. Okay, so sorry, for Nav Drone, thanks for the intro. I wasn't looking at chat because I'm looking at my slides here, so I appreciate that. Thank you for the question, Michael. Nav Drone is a app and portal that provides unmanned traffic management for drone flights in Canada that want to fly in controlled airspace. They also provide you with the ability to plan, survey, and store information about flights outside of controlled airspace, as well as basic operations. So it's a universal platform for drone pilots to rely on for planning and for getting ready to fly and making sure that you have all the information. One of the requirements as a drone pilot, whether you're basic or advanced, is to complete what's called a site survey. And a site survey is you need to determine where you're going to fly, how far you're going to fly, what hazards there are, what regulatory rules apply to that flight, what airspace you're going to be in, who you would contact if you have a problem. And so there's a bunch of steps that you would go through, and what Nav Drone accomplishes that through their platform. When we start looking in Nav Drone, there's information that you'll see, and this is an example of controlled airspace. We're still near Pearson to the northeast here for Buttonville, and you'll notice that there's a grid surrounding this entire airspace. That grid system is used for providing drone flight authorization up to and including a maximum upper limit altitude in that grid. So if we look at this section here, you'll see that it's a lighter orange, and then as it gets closer to Pearson, it's a darker orange. That is relative to the altitude. So at the outer rim, it's probably 400 feet above ground, 300 feet, 200 feet, 100 feet right to the surface. So, and if I want to get permission as an advanced pilot, I would submit my application through this app. And depending on the altitude that I request, it might be automatically approved as long as all my paperwork and site survey meets the requirements and my drone meets the requirements. Or if it's above the altitude that is an upper limit, say for instance, I wanted to fly at 300 feet in vicinity of Buttonville here on this 100-foot grid, a set of human eyeballs are going to be taking a look at my application and manually approving it. So what I wanted to talk about tonight was the advanced operations in the vicinity of uncontrolled airspace. So we're going to say what some examples of that would be: a heliport that is in Class G airspace, so a hospital heliport, or an airport or a water airport. So airports are certified aerodromes that have an operator certificate because they are required to prevent the general public from entering the hard surface or the prepared surface. So examples would be in Class G are Chilliwack, Vernon, Seashell Hospital, and also Surrey Memorial out here are places that are good examples of uncontrolled certified aerodromes. So let's go back to the slides here. And so here's a certified example. This is Brampton Caledon, which is just northwest of Pearson. It is in Class G airspace, out and away from the control zone for Pearson International. And you'll notice it's an orange circle on nav drone, but it doesn't have a grid. There's no way to get permission because no permission is required because it's not controlled airspace. It is Class G airspace. So I'm an advanced pilot. I can fly within this 3 nautical mile circle that this is denoting that basic pilots can't enter. But how do I do this legally and safely? Well, this is where CARS 90173 comes in. So we'll look at a CFS, and we're going to dig in a little bit here. But this is a certified airport. And this is, again, where it matters because an aerodrome, and you'll notice in the background here, we've got these yellow pills. Those are the extended center lines of aerodromes in the vicinity that are uncertified aerodromes. They don't have operator certificates, so there's not the distinction that you need to be a advanced pilot to fly within 3 nautical miles. A basic pilot can fly adjacent to an uncertified aerodrome, but remember, CARS 906, the safety rule, is probably not the best idea. So when we look at a CFS page for an operator, for an airport that is certified, one of the things we want to look at is it certified? Yes. And then we want to take note of the operator contact information. We're also going to want to take note of the radio frequencies for that airport. And we'll jump back to this in a second. So CARS 9173, and this is the latest version of the AIM as of the 6th of October this month. How do you comply with flying within 5 nautical miles or of the aerodrome facility, or sorry, 3 nautical miles? I'm not greatest with numbers. We conduct the site survey, and that's what we can do through NavDrone. We need to, and this is important, is we review AIM 345, which is the screenshot of here, and you can see it's in blue. So this is another revision. In March, the last edition was blue, so it was another revision. So it's constantly being updated for new interpretation or addition for clarity to best interpret how to follow 90173 the best. So it's always a good idea to work from the latest aviation information manual. We want to make sure we know what's the most hazardous area in the operation. So if we're going to be flying a drone on the extended center line of an approach or a departure at low altitude, and there's a good chance of airplanes flying near our drone, the number one rule for a drone pilot is to see and avoid any crewed aircraft. So we need to figure out where that we are potentially going to be that could be that hazard. A good example would be in Vernon, doing real estate flying on the final approach. You're definitely going to be a hazard to aviation, so we need to really ramp up our site survey and our planning. If we determine that the drone is likely to be in the way of aircraft or there's a potential interaction hazard, and even so that we're going to avoid all aircraft contact and get on the ground if there is a potential. So if we're monitoring the aerodrome circuit and we hear drones or airplanes are on final and we're working on the extended center line of final, we're on the ground, it's still we should be contacting the aerodrome, the airport or heliport operator, and letting them know of our planned operations. If they have any schedule or safety requests or guidance that they need you to comply with, it is your responsibility to do your best to comply with that, because again, this is from a safety perspective. And then it's definitely a good practice to make sure that you maintain a listening watch on either the ATF or the mandatory frequency that's published in the CFS. This is in the latest version of the AIM, and let me go back to my slide button so I can confirm it. But we'll get into the best practices of this further. One of the important things to remember is that this is uncontrolled airspace. The aerodrome operator does not have the final say on whether you are able to enter the airspace surrounding that facility. However, they do have the ability to prevent you from trespassing on airport property. So you want to work with them. If you need to operate a drone on airport property, you absolutely need to work with them and ensure you've got a good safety plan hashed out. But if you're doing, like I said, real estate in the vicinity of the airport and you're within that 3 nautical mile radius, however, safety has been taken care of. You've got all the tools and you've got the radio and you're in communication with either the operator or you're able to maintain a listening watch of the area, then and you're operating from private property that is not under the purview of the airport, they ultimately don't have the ability to stop you from flying as long as you're operating safely. So some best practices, like I said, you want to conduct your site survey and publish it in Nav Drone. I recommend using the desktop version. There's a desktop and an app version of the tool. When you're doing your site survey or you're planning, I strongly recommend using the web-based or desktop version of Nav Drone. You can upload all your documents, you can do your site survey, you can complete that CARS 90127 requirement for your site survey, all within that app, and then you can save it. And then when you get to the site and you go to fly, you can then launch that same mission plan on your phone and press the takeoff button in order to start logging your flight, and then press the land button when you're finished. By using Nav Drone, it aids in information sharing. I'm not sure if it necessarily goes anywhere specific, but when other people are planning their operations, they are made aware of potential other drone missions in the area. So if you're in a busy area where there's lots of potential drone flights, it will give you a bit of an extra awareness of drone missions in the area. If you find that you're in an area where it's definitely a strong requirement to contact the airport operator, do it at least a week in advance, unless they have any, and that way you'll give yourself an option for any concerns or safety conversations that need to happen, or if there's any kind of risk assessment that maybe has been not captured through your site survey. Sometimes you're dealing with a regional operator for multiple, say a health authority has multiple heliports, and you might be dealing with the regional head. It would be a good idea to contact them as soon as possible when you know something is going to be happening, so that they can trickle that information down to the operator of the heliport that you're going to be nearest. I was working a mapping mission about 200 meters away from a hospital heliport in Seychelles, and unfortunately, the on-site security had missed an email that was giving them a heads up that we were coming. So there was some terse conversations before it all got hashed out. As I said, use the takeoff and land buttons. And I strongly recommend, if you don't hold an ROCA or a restricted operator certificate for an aviation radio, at least get a scanner and review the comm section of the AIM. So the VFR phraseology guide and understand what that means, so that if you hear someone calling downwind in a circuit, you know where to look for that airplane or helicopter, so that you're aware of where they are and you can make a plan to either complete your mission safely or get the drone on the ground until they're no longer in the area. And finally, it's not required, but I do recommend considering getting a strobe for your drone if you're working in the vicinity of an airport or a heliport, especially in low light. In the States, it's required to be visible from at least 3 nautical miles. So that would be a good reference to go for if you're looking for a drone-friendly strobe that you can aid in visibility. And so just to clear things up in terms of authority, with Air Transport Canada controls the Canadian airspace. They've delegated control for controlled airspace to NAV Canada. So that's how you get permission to fly in control zones and controlled airspace. And then enforcement is also delegated to the RCMP and law enforcement officers to ensure that you're carrying the minimum and all the documents that are required to fly, which is your pilot certificate, the registration, and the aircraft manual. They must all be available at minimum for you, including also your SOPs and your emergency procedures. When it comes to privacy, it's covered by either PIPEDA or different provincial regions for privacy commissioners. Ultimately, what it comes down to is, I get this question a lot. Is can I fly my drone over my neighbor's house, or can my neighbor fly their drone over my house? Yes, they can, as long as they comply with Transport Canada regulations. And then when it comes to privacy, if they're flying at a sufficiently high altitude that they aren't seeing anything that they wouldn't expect to normally not be able to see, such as like hovering in front of someone's window creepily, that's not legal. And then for ground, it is also important that when you're flying the drone, you are flying from the ground that you stand on, you have permission and are allowed to do that. So different municipal bylaws apply. Pretty much every federal park and provincial park, it's a no-go unless you have a permit from the park. And pretty much every park will not issue a recreational permit. It will be for commercial use, and it's to the benefit of the park. And I will go forward here. So if you don't already have a drone pilot license or drone pilot certificate, there are 2 categories, as I've mentioned. There's basic and advanced operations. If you only want to fly away from airports, away from controlled airspace, and away from people, you can get by with a basic certificate. However, I would imagine the audience here is pretty switched on and aviation friendly. So like I said, I'm talking about the advanced environment. You can study and prepare for the advanced online exam. And if you only write the online exam and pass it and get your 80%, you will be issued a basic pilot certificate. So you can do the harder exam of the 2 and be issued a basic pilot certificate until you decide you're ready to fly and do the in-person flight review, which was the second half of the certification process. So you can study, prepare, do the online test, fly at your leisure, maintain your recency, and then if you decide you want to upgrade to an advanced pilot certificate, you've already completed the hard work of studying and building all your knowledge and being equipped with all the tools you need. Now you just have to apply your SOPs and make sure that you're fresh on the advanced operation environment and come and do an in-person flight review. Okay, so here's my pitch. Coastal offers our online training. So we have our advanced online bundle, which is the online training that I mentioned earlier, that it's on demand. You can do it at any time from anywhere in Canada. It's basically all pre-recorded video as well as downloadable documents. And then we have a massive bank of sample test questions as well as our standard operating procedures guide. We typically bundle that together with our flight review package, but like I said, you don't have to buy it all at once. You can buy it all at once and save a bit, but you can also just, if you already have an advanced pilot certificate, or sorry, if you already have completed the advanced online exam, you can then just book the in-person flight review, which we have a bit of a prep course, as well as the advanced scenarios that are required by Transport Canada in order to demonstrate that you understand how to fly in controlled airspace. And then you would come to one of our flight reviewers across Canada. We have in-person reviewers And it's about a 90-minute exercise where we do a knowledge review, we do a practical exercise, and then we also will review your documentation and ensure everything is meeting the standard. So that pretty much wraps it up for my presentation side. I'm going to move over to the chat window, and then I guess we can open up the questions.
Yes. Hey, that was great. There are a few questions in here. I really like the pro tip with the strobe for increasing visibility. There was a question around, or maybe a comment around, privacy legislation. So perhaps we could cover that. Any pro tips for navigating through that based on your province? There is a specific mention of the Ontario legislation. I'm not going to get into some acronyms here, but the Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act, the freedom, the Municipal Freedom of Information and Protection of Privacy Act as well. So there was some reference there.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would say that ultimately it's going to be regional for some of this, and some of it's federal. And I go by, if it feels wrong, it is wrong when it comes to privacy. There's typically, drones have wide angle lenses. They've only in the last couple generations started to get point where the megapixels of the sensors or the lenses zoom capabilities are where you could start really digging in from afar in terms of identifying persons. But the majority of what drones are being used for, what I'm looking at from my perspective is, I'll get people that approach me and ask me, well, what are they doing with the drone? Why are they flying it near me? Are they following me? And the important thing to remember is a lot of drone pilots, for example, in real estate, they may be flying over someone's house, but they're looking in a completely opposite direction at another property that they're marketing for a person. So it's just circumstance that they happen to be over your house. They're not monitoring your Wi-Fi or doing something nefarious, I hope, but they are. I've had this exact situation happen to myself where I've been doing a high resolution wide format image that required stitching about 15 different photos together. So the drone had to hover in one spot for about 5-10 minutes. And it was the perfect spot for the drone to fit for framing for this across the street property was directly over top of their neighbor's house. And so the homeowner came out and started asking questions, and I explained what we were doing. And I had positioned it also exactly over their house so that I wouldn't be flying over people unprotected. So there's safety reasons for doing that, as well as making sure that you can get the job done.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's that's a very healthy way to look at it too. I would say that for me, that's one of the hardest or most challenging aspects of getting into flying, of knowing where to fly and navigating through those types of conversations. I'm not as confident of going up into a municipal park and starting to fly. Perhaps there's others in the room who have a similar experience of living in a more urban area where it may make others uneasy if you fly.
Yeah, drone anxiety is definitely a thing.
There's a few other questions in here. Going back to the uncontrolled airspace, if there's any special procedures, if there's micro drones or ultralights also operating in the area.
So for micro drones, there's no additional procedures. It's ultimately, it comes back to the golden rule. Like I said, a micro drone pilot can fly in uncontrolled airspace in the vicinity of an aerodrome or an airport. They can also actually fly in controlled airspace. What there may be is the drone manufacturer might have geofencing enabled, and that's the final stopgap to prevent someone from inadvertently flying into a busy international airport with a micro drone. So that requires understanding of the process and reviewing the map, and then also an identity verification in a lot of cases to make that work. But it's important to remember that those geofencings don't necessarily reflect the regulatory structure. So in Canada, the micro drone category is pretty open in terms of where you can and can't fly. That's not necessarily the case in a lot of other countries. So I guess another point that would be is if you plan to travel, always double check if it's the same regulatory approval for that. For ultralights, I would treat ultralights like any other aircraft because they're crewed and there's people aboard. So any remotely piloted aircraft must give way to any other aircraft. We're talking about something that has a commercial value but no value of life if you were to terminate the flight of a drone. So we would want to get rid of that before we have to come into conflict with any kind of crewed aircraft in the air.
Very good. I'm going to just take one more question, and then I'll come back to you, Ian. We'll go through. We'll listen to what Anne-Sophie has to share with us today as well. It's very relevant to today's discussion. There's some conversation on asking on FPV drone in line of sight in using a friend as a spotter. This individual in particular is using a basic certificate. And there's some good conversation here. Of course, FPV, if above 250, follows the same rules, but use of goggles. So I'll let you add to that or
Sure. Yeah, FPV is new and exciting. I got into it this winter as well. And so with any drone that weighs 250 grams or more, you must maintain visual line of sight of the drone at all times. And that can be either the pilot in flight with the drone to aid in situational awareness. So their job is to look for where the drone is and also to look for if there's a risk of aircraft approaching the area. Because if you're flying FPV in this direction and there's a Cessna bearing down on you, you wouldn't see it because you can't see behind the drone. That's what your visual observer is for. And that's required for any drone operation that's 250 grams or more, whether you're basic or advanced.
Okay, very good. I know that there's a few other questions incoming, so I'm going to stop it there, but give a quick reminder that Coastal Drone and COPA do have a partnership together. If you are a COPA member interested in getting started, there's a... Thank you, Ian. Really appreciate it there. Okay, Anne-Sophie, so we have some big, interesting information or news to hear from you. So over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sharon. So it's one project. I think my presentation should be on right now. Yes. Okay, perfect. Excellent. So yes, we've been working with you at COPA to present the RSMS, the RPAS safety management system, and to make it available nationally to all the remote pilots in Canada. So like brief presentation about this, and I also want to take the time to show you the value of participating into the RPAS safety management system. It's coming from the initiative is coming from the Flight Safety Action Team from Aerial Evolution Association of Canada, and the idea behind the Flight Safety Program is to provide help with leading, entering leadership in the community to create this dynamic community so that people are empowered, RPAS operators can learn from their own, and so that all of the industry becomes safer flying drones around. So the RPAS safety management system is the core initiative that binds all of the flight safety initiatives together, and that's where this is what we are setting up right now, and it will be available shortly. And the idea is that all these stories that we learn from each other, that we learned from Jan tonight and from the questions you're asking, is that we have a platform so that we can all share our stories so that everybody can learn from each other. So that if Jan posts story or if Sharon posts stories from when she would be flying a drone, then I can learn from her, and then they can learn from me from the not so good days that we've been through while flying drones. And what is great about this platform is that to make everyone feel comfortable sharing their stories, is that all the data are de-identified. So the system asks questions in a way to lead you into investigating a flight safety occurrence on your own. And it's asking questions to assess the risks and the causes without having information that could identify you. And it's all free of charge. Partly because COPA is sponsoring it and that Aeromatric is sponsoring. So yes, we're making it, the idea is to make it as available as possible for all of you. So yes, so the idea behind a safety management system is to promote better practices, prevent occurrence, understand a little bit more what's actually happening when we're flying. So what kind of accidents or incidents are occurring. Someone from Transport Canada was telling me, well, we know why planes crash, but we don't really know as much why drones crash or why drone have accidents or incidents and what's actually happening. So we want to build this statistical data so we can understand what's really happening. And the values behind the program is to collaborate together so that we increase safety and that as a country and as an industry, like we're leading everyone else to become safer. So you have a quick look at what the system is will be looking like and where to access this when it will be available. You have a lot of information on the LinkedIn. Well, there's information posted on the LinkedIn anytime there's something pertinent to say about it. So you see the platform is built so that it's easy for anyone to go answer the questions and to report an occurrence that was happening. And it's also leading you through the process of a flight safety investigation. The last part of the process is built around finding the cause factor, the root causes of the incidents or the accidents, the occurrence, and also to propose and to share preventative measure. Because the whole idea behind this is that we reduce the reoccurrence and the occurrence of flight safety incidents. So finding preventative measures and sharing them with the community ensure that accidents will happen less often. What's in it for you? Participating into the community is really to increase safety, but like by increasing the safety of operation, you prevent the loss of resources of your aircraft, of injuring people around you. It's also a good source of knowledge, so you can learn from it. So if you're curious about flying better and flying more, in all the flight safety stories, there's always something to learn from. And so you can learn without injuring yourself. And also increasing safety around your operation is also improving the social acceptance of your operation. So if your neighbors feel more comfortable having the drone flying around them, well, they will be more happy to see you there and be more acceptant of having you in their vicinity. Same thing for airports and crewed aircrafts. If we improved the general safety of the industry, well, they will be more comfortable having us around. And so we can like be more comfortable like flying in more places in Canada. So what's in it for you? The story. So like you see this particular drone crashed over a built-up city close to Montreal. So this one was a mechanical failure from the aircraft. You see the parachute deployed and the drone felt right on the edge of the St. Lawrence River. So that was a good day, very good day. So what we want to learn from it is that the drone on that morning, the previous flight with the drone was done into inclement weather condition. And even though the manufacturer is telling that it's IP45 and that it's like sturdy and that it can withstand light weather, it maybe did not so much. And the aircraft was pulling out warnings before takeoff. So at the moment of the takeoff, the aircraft was not doing any special warnings, but the pilot decided to go for the mission anyway. It seemed safe. The drone was saying it was ready to go. And just like that, on the first flight, everything seemed to fly very well. And then the parachute deployed and the drone was on the ground. So there was a question about parachutes to fly above people earlier in the chat. So yes, if you want to fly above people, the parachute is is one of the mechanisms that is used to be able to let you fly above people. And yes, you have to fly above the minimum altitude that the parachute gives you to be able to operate. So for instance, this parachute is operable above 45 meters. So you want to keep your drone flying above 45 meters for the parachute to be efficient and to be safe for the people that you would be flying above. Another good story was happening in this vicinity. We were talking about geofences Previously, this one is from DJI, but other systems have geofences as well. In all the effort of preventing the drones from entering airspaces that would that could create an hazard to safety. So you see some class F, some prisons, some specific areas, even in uncontrolled airspace, have geofences. The thing that happened on that day was that the pilot took off from below a geofence, went outside of the geofence, and then took altitude, made the mission, and then when tried to fly back toward its takeoff and toward its safe takeoff and landing area, the geofence was blocking the pilot from flying the drone back to the landing area. So that's an issue, and that can be a pretty big hazard, because it could be in an urban area or in a setting that is not necessarily good to land your drone just anywhere. And when you're coming back from your mission, usually you have less batteries and you're getting a little bit more tired, a little bit more nervous from your flight. So the preventative measure so at the end of the day, the pilot just, as the pilot was trying to land somewhere else and flying lower, got to be able to fly underneath the geofence and went back safely to its to his planned landing area, and that was secured. So there was no hurt on that day. But what we have to learn from this is that it's really important to know how the geofences are working and where they are, so that you're situationally aware of the risks of these geofences, and you can unlock them before your flight as well to make sure that they won't be obstructing your flight trajectory. And the pilot, like, also on that day learned the behavior of the geofence on that particular geofence, that it was staged with altitude, so you can fly underneath it. So planning and knowing about your environment can prevent a lot of risks and a lot of bad days. We've been talking about nav drone a little bit previously. So when you're doing more advanced operation, it's good to share where you're flying, even in controlled and in uncontrolled airspaces. So it's really good for situational awareness, as Jan was stating. And if you look at the interface, once you have the authorization, this one is authorized. It is in a controlled airspace, but you see the warnings and the wording that is spread on the screen. You also have it for uncontrolled airspace. You see one warning on the screen where it says that the proposed operation is within another drone operation zone. So that's good for your situational awareness of other drones, although it will not be giving you yet the information about the other drone or what's the actual flight zone. So it's more giving you a heads up that you might see a drone flying around. Also, if you organize two routes that are spreading one over each other, it will tell you that your own operation is in the way of your other own operation. So that's a good thing to know. Now, if you look closely at what Nav Canada is providing as information in the warning signs when you're publishing information and publishing flights onto the site, one very important one is that the safety of their operation, of the drone operation, the pilots must ensure the safety of the operation at all times, including no likelihood of collision with other aircrafts. So in a part of the cars, you have the rule about right-of-way. So drones are at the total end of the right-of-way series. So we have to let the way to any other aircraft other than drones. And both in uncontrolled and in controlled airspace, drone pilots are responsible for letting the right of way of the other aircraft. And what might surprise you if you're flying crewed aircraft or if you're flying in controlled airspaces, and that's something that we also learned as part of the flight safety discussions that we had, is that the controllers, the air traffic controllers, are not responsible for spacing the traffic away from you when you're flying. So you are responsible for staying away from the crewed aircraft. Even though if you're on a commercial mission or something very specific, you have to let way of the other aircraft. if you're flying in the vicinity of airports or aerodromes, the crewed aircraft will not necessarily be flying above 500 feet. They will need to go below 500 feet at some point to land. So it's very important to have a good situational awareness of the environment you're in, especially when you're close to airports, because you have to let the right of way of the aircrafts. When you're flying a crewed aircraft from above, it's very, very difficult to distinguish a drone flying from the rest of the features on the ground. So it is unlikely that the crewed aircraft will see you flying your drone. So it's very, very important that you get away, that you keep a good situational awareness of the crewed aircraft flying and that you stay away from them. And another good note, yes, is to be familiar with the available information relevant to the intended flight before commencing a flight. So relevant information can be very vast. So you really want to know your environment before you're flying in there. So nav drone is a good tool. We had the site selection tool from NRC that is providing good information. You might also want to be looking at Nav Canada charts, VNCs and VTAs, where they're providing a lot more information. It's also, remember, we're talking a lot about flying and being in the sky, but there's a lot of risks that are coming from the ground as well. Maybe from the noise, if you're flying close to an highway or to a train, a railroad, or anything noisy, the noise from the ground will prevent you from hearing the planes flying and the helicopters flying. So it's a little thing that is adding lots of risk to your flying. So having a good knowledge of what's going on the ground around you and in the sky will be very helpful for you. So controlled airspace are a thing. And if you look at the features on this map, you see on the south, it's Montreal, and you have St. Lawrence River, and you have Quebec City that is way up north there. You see the St. Lawrence River is a straight route from Montreal to Quebec City. So a lot of aircrafts are using this route to go from one city to the other, or just to go for sightseeing because the St. Lawrence is pretty. So by analyzing the feature on the maps, you know that there will be crewed traffic flying there, and lots of population. So you can forecast that there will be traffic and that you can anticipate it. You can also see on these maps the CYA airspace, where crewed aircraft would be doing training activities, and they would be flying lower or doing maneuvers, or not necessarily looking outside as much as they would do if they're only doing cross-country flying. So there's a lot of clues on these maps that can help you be more aware of what's going on around you. And a map that I'm, an event that I've been in, last flight safety story for today, it happened in Lac Seul. So really not a lonely place, really not the only people, we were not the only people there around, even if it's the lonely lake. When you're flying close to lakes, there are also hydroplanes that might be flying around significantly low, because it's their takeoff and landing areas, right? The water. So beware of all the waterways, because it's not necessarily identified on the map that there will be hydroplane activities. They will still be there. And it's not to put the blame on hydroplanes, absolutely not. But it is a risk. And what happened on that mission, so it was a commercial mapping mission. The drone was flying steady paths, like steady survey lines at 400 feet from the ground. And the crew had been calling on the radio on 126.7 and on the hydroplane frequency that it was flying above the community. And the hydroplanes and there was a group of hydroplanes doing sightseeing tours, and they were on their company frequencies chatting together. So they were not very aware of the operation, and at some point, one of the hydroplane flew below the drone. So I can imagine the bad time that the crew had from the ground. So we're talking about visual line of sight so that it's close enough. And this what like prevented the incident from happening on that day is that both crew member were not from the same observation spot. So the visual observer being like further away from the trees and from the drone could see that the path from the hydroplane was not in conflict with the drone, and that the best move on that particular moment was to keep the drone exactly where it was. But yes, it was not a risk that the crew anticipated when waking up in the morning. So yes, some risks are not necessarily on the map, but having a knowledge and a situational awareness of your environment can like save you a pretty bad day. So as we are talking about visual line of sight, on this mention, Navdrone is talking about weather conditions in Lac Seul or in very many mapping areas. Trees can also block you the line of sight. But what you also have to what you also have to remember about visual line of sight is that it is imposed because it's the detect and avoid system that you have. Your eyes is the only detect and avoid system that is actually efficient with these drones. So you have to see the drone flying. You have to see the surrounding of the drone when you're flying. And remember that if you fly it so far from you that you only see a little tiny dot, you can still see it. It's visual line of sight. But it gets so difficult to determine whether your drone is flying close to a structure, close to an aircraft, when it's getting difficult to perceive the distance between the drone and its surrounding, then it's visual line of sight, but it's not necessarily safe to do so. So it's all of the things that you should remember, that you should judge, and that you can learn from other people, from other experienced pilots sharing their stories. So that was the flight safety stories I wanted to share with you tonight about like more advanced operation. Because when you're flying more advanced operation, real life is getting at you pretty fast. And it is fun and it is great operation and is very useful, but it's really good that people talk about flight safety and like keep it in mind, and that we all share our experiences so that we all learn from each other and that we can all increase our capacity. So if you have questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them.
Hey, Anne-Sophie, that was great. I'm going to keep my camera off. I think I've cursed the room, so anytime I turn on, it causes some broadcast issues. So hopefully you don't mind speaking to a static photo. So I'm going to turn that off right now. That was a really great presentation, and I think this room is in consensus when I say that we love flight safety stories. It's the best way to learn, and the RSMS, the data that you pull and that you receive will only help improve the flying community that we're growing here in Canada. Of course, with anything as to do with reporting, there's often questions around privacy. So if you could walk us through what that looks like in terms of protecting the privacy of those who do report, and what will reporting look like in the future?
Yes, absolutely. When you're logging into the platform, we're asking for your email address and a few information just to create a profile for you, so that you can store your reports and access them and draft them and then think about it and then review them. But this information is stored separately from all the information that you're logging into flight safety reports. Now, all the questions from the flight safety reports was it in a class F airspace? So in a traditional aviation, when we're asking for a location, it's often to assess the risk of flying at this particular location. So instead of asking you for the location, we're asking you about the risk that were involved in your flight. And then after, the information is handled by only the flight safety action team, like verified members who are like the flight safety people who are handling the information, and they are not associated with any names or phone number or email address. Like we get like aggregated reports of like really just the questions that were on the form. And then it's also the flight safety people who are generating reports, statistical reports, and warning reports, and like email alerts, so that it's only sharing the information that is relevant to the reader. Does that answer your question?
Very good. I would say so, yes. There is a comment in here in saying that the RSMS is, it's a very neat concept in that it brings the traditional aviation spirit to the world of drones.
Initiatives popping up in the world, but it's the only one I've heard that I've been told about that is similar to this one specifically. And this is coming from the flight safety background that I have from flying with the Air Cadets. So I did my flight safety course, the Canadian Air Force flight safety course, and it's all derived and adapted from their content and from the flight safety material that we've been developing for the Air Cadets. So it's we're leading program, and like when I did my training, people from all over the world were training with us. So this is like a great base, and we're also looking through crewed aviation material from ICAO, and so we're really trying to make it both accessible for everyone to use, and both with like significant knowledge that can be shared, so that everyone from all level of operating can benefit from the platform.
That's great. I mean, I think that we should be pretty, I don't know if proud is too bold of a word, but proud as a country that we're, potentially the first to launch this type of writers, because it gives them information on how to adequately improve new groups for this new market. And COPA does have an insurance package that is usable throughout the world, so not just across Canada, but globally from a liability perspective. So there's that point as well to another benefit. Okay, I'm just going to go back to the chat here. I think here I'm going to ask both you and Ian some questions generally. So. Before I get to that next step, where do you see the RSMS going in the next few years? How do you see it evolving?
I see it running online, and I see it as a great interaction tool for the community, so that everyone is openly sharing information, and that everyone benefits from regular communication from the RSMS. Like saying, for instance, well, the new DJI Phantom XYZ has been behaving in a particular way if you're flying in this particular way, so watch out for this, so that like we can like use these information to develop tools that are helping you to make your operation safer and more easier to be safe, and that the tools are helping you to fly in a constructive way.
Very good. So in keeping with the theme of rules, I'm curious what we know that the regulations will continue iterating, I suppose. What regulations are you actually hoping to see? And I'm going to pose this question to Ian and potentially to Anne-Sophie if you have a follow-up to Ian's answer. You are on mute, Ian.
I am on mute. Sorry, I had multiple layers of mute going on to be safe. Sorry, could you say the question again about the regulations? I caught the last second of it.
So my question was around the what kind of regulations are you hoping to see TC launching in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and in the agriculture industry, because a lot of drones are getting pretty heavy. Like as the capabilities increase, the spray drones that we see coming through are starting at like 26, 27 kilograms. So you can't even take off without even a payload on them. The other notice to propose amendment was for routine beyond line of sight operations in uncontrolled airspace, so away from populated areas and away. So those are two that I'm eager to see more development on. I think that the pandemic had a bit of an impact on that, so we're hoping that we'll see some more announcements at Aerial Evolution this fall. So we'll see if that comes up.
Okay, very good. Yeah, well, potentially in the next couple weeks there. And Sophie, did you have any thoughts to add on to that?
Yeah, well, from my understanding of what's going on, I understand that the current cars Part 9 will stay relatively the same. So for like basic and advanced operation, and that current, but for the like entry level drone, I think that the cars Part 9 will be relatively similar. We're hoping for maybe the online exam be a little bit more representative of what our role as remote pilot actually is. But other than that, I think like it should be more focused on more complex operation.
I appreciate the two-folded answer there for both advanced and basic. So this is almost an ethical question, but I know that it's an ongoing debate in how people tend to see the drones are easy to access through the Best Buys of our world, and so we're seeing more and more people get into it, and that's great. So like there's a low barrier to entry. However, it's not always you have any pro tips for navigating that type of situation. I've certainly seen on my hikes in provincial or national parks some people sneaking in their drones. I'm sure there's one or two who find their way in. So my question is back to the two of you, but I'll start with Ian of how do you approach that, and how should the community approach that?
With grace, to start with. I love when people approach me when I'm flying, as long as I'm not doing something stressful. If people approach me when I'm flying, I'd hope they give me a chance to land and get the drone on the ground so I can talk to them or complete it. But I have no problem chatting with people about the regulations and all the efforts that I went through to make sure that I'm doing it legally and safely. I get a lot of people that will walk by and chirp me and tell me that I'm doing something illegal or not want to engage in a conversation and tell me, don't you know what you're doing is illegal? And I'm like, I'd love to tell you why it's not. But the low-hanging fruit are the fact that every retailer, these drones are selling as ubiquitous as cell phones or Xboxes. It's a luxury good, ships in 2019. And it's something that we work hard on trying to get that information onto the store shelf adjacent to the drone as best we can. But regulations aren't what sells the drone. It's the drone specifications and capabilities, the 4K HDR high frame rate that these things can do. So people love to talk about the specs and the capabilities of a drone. They don't necessarily want to hear about the fact that they might need to get a license to fly the drone. So it's definitely something that there's two approaches to it. There's the stick and there's the education side of it, and we choose the education side for sure. So I would say that as someone that's concerned about the general public, hold your local retailer accountable, right? If you're in a camera shop and they've got a drone on display and they're pitching it and it's like you can put them on the spot and ask them, well, what kind of regulations does this have? What do I need to do to get this drone in the air? Is there anything else I need to know? Because as a retailer, they should know that. That's their responsibility to ensure that whoever's using this tool
easy to sell and that they should be regulated. But we can ask a lot from Transport Canada, and I met many individuals working for the RPAS task force, and they're all amazing people, and they really are working for the best of the industry and for the best of the community and for aviation safety. And the truth is, like, they can put any regulation, but if the United States are not putting these regulations, and if Europe are not putting the same regulations, when it's just so easy to get a drone from Amazon, and it's not, the regulation won't be like really effective It will be there, it'll just be annoying, and it will be impacting our industry negatively. And then it's the US and Europe and China that will just, have the lead on, and the problem will still be there. So a bit like flight safety, it's something that we should all be talking about as a community. And there are journals, TV shows, and it becomes, where it's very accessible for everyone. Like, it's very accessible for everyone to drive a car, and yet every car driver usually stops when there's a stop sign or a red light. So our habits towards driving, we should create the same thing towards flying aircrafts and flying drones, since they're so accessible. So I believe the solution is in educating everyone around us about the safety of using these things and what is acceptable and not acceptable as a behavior when we're flying drones.
I like that. Everybody is responsible for now sharing the gospel that is flight safety. So we're part of that now. If the broadcast is cutting out for you, I apologize. If you haven't already tried moving over to Chrome, please do so. There will be a recording of tonight's session. I'm not having any technical issues myself, so I can tell you that the recording will be pretty smooth in rewatching it itself. And I know that there was a few questions that you already answered in the chat, but for those who are watching the recording, I think it's best to bring it back here. So as it relates to the test itself,
every 24 months, you must do either they call it a rust remover seminar, or a self-directed exercise, a flight review, or a test. Those 4 options can be used to maintain your recency. I personally did my advanced online exam the day it went live. I didn't do the flight review until it's like 18 months later. So I was still recent, and I just reviewed the material and then finished it after the fact.
Okay, very good. And as it relates to preparing for the advanced written test, are there good resources for testing? I'm sure Coastal Drone has some options as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, we've got over 350 to 400 questions in our test bank that are sample test questions similar to what is on the advanced online exam. There are other materials out there. There's the Transport Canada put out this document called the TP 15263. It is the knowledge requirement standard for getting either your basic or advanced. So you have that as a reference material for studying. And there's lots of materials. And it's also important to mention the material is open book. So the material reference and everything that you need is available as a study tools for you during the exam.
Very good. There is a question here as it relates to medicals. Do you need that to get your certification?
No, you don't need a category 1 through 3 medical to be a.
Is there any pros or cons with choosing between fixed wing? So the example here was SenseFly EB, or does it need to be a rotorcraft?
For the purposes of a flight review, no. The only thing it needs to be is more than 250 grams, registered, and it must have the ability to fly under the safety assurance declaration requirements of the flight review. So if you're doing the flight review in controlled airspace, it must have the ability to fly in controlled airspace. A lot of our candidates will use a micro drone like a Mavic Mini, and they will install the prop guards, which brings it up over the 250 grams, and then register it. But it's important to remember that drone would then no longer have a safety assurance declaration, so you could not use it in Class C, D, or E airspace or controlled airspace. You'd have to go somewhere that's got Class G airspace. And the fixed wing side, I've had 1 or 2 fixed wing candidates that I've done a flight review for, and we went to a MAC field, Model Airplane Association of Canada field, in order to do that, because our test facility here is more oriented towards multi-rotor. So it's just more about do you need more space to do the review or not?
For using the MAC field, did you need to reach out to MAC themselves?
The candidate did on our behalf, yes. The candidate was also a MAC member, so they organized everything to get permission to use that MAC field.
I'm sure there's some MAC members in the room questioning whether or not they need to get any form of a certificate. So what are your thoughts there?
MAC has an exemption for drone options. Like I said earlier, if it's a fixed wing or a multi-rotor, it's still an RPAS in Transport Canada's, but they've made an exemption that MAC members can stay away from the basic and advanced certification. If you want to fly away from a MAC field, it would be a good idea to at least get your basic certificate or advanced if you need to fly in an advanced environment.
Very good. There's a comment here that you need to be a MAC member to use their fields as well. And Sophie, for you had for one of your examples over the Salt Lookout, there was a question on your internet connectivity in remote locations. Any comments to that?
So yeah, it has been challenging for us. So we had to look for any phone signal or any Wi-Fi connection. The worst is when your aircraft or some of the batteries or camera on your aircraft is new, and then you need to register the aircraft, and then it's not flying well if it's not registered, and if like the firmwares are not updated. So that can be very problematic. There's a way to fly outside of any like internet range, but you have to figure it out depending on the aircraft system that you're using, and you should prep before leaving that you try it without any internet connection before going up north or away from phone signal.
I just wanted to add to that question as well. The phone signal is a critical one. If you're flying in an area that there's a geofence unlocked for a drone, say a red zone, you need to have a cellular connection in order to get that two-factor authentication code to verify your identity. So I don't think it's just an internet connection at that point, it's cellular. So if say you're on satellite like Starlink in a remote area, it might not be enough. So it's something to definitely test if you're outside of a cell area. But that said, most red geofence areas, I think there's cell reception because they're around an aerodrome. So you might be okay.
Very, very good. So it looks like we're coming to that time at the end of the our show here, folks. So I'm going to ask both of you to just to answer what should folks kind of take away.
Not.com. And we have right on our front page, you'll see the breakdown between basic and advanced operations, and you can choose what path you want to take. You don't need to start with basic operations. If you have no experience with a drone, you can start with advanced. It's still an online, no experience required for the online test. It's all knowledge to start with. And then you can start building confidence and experience as a basic drone pilot, and then move into the flight review side of it. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take them over email or chat, or you can phone us. All of our contact information is on our site at coastaldrone.co.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. Really appreciate the time tonight. And Sophie, what about you?
Yeah, so take the process, Sky. So it's a serious process that deserves your time and your attention. And then once this process is done, you will learn a lot of really cool things to it. And some people discover passion for aviation through like going through all of these courses. And once you've been through it and that you understand where you're flying, it is so much more pleasurable and so much more satisfying as an experience to be like a serious, good remote pilot, responsible also for what they're doing.
Very good. For all for you to receive that. Again, this is going to be recorded, so you can review at a later time. And I'm happy to share that we are looking into other tools as well. This particular streaming platform has been very useful for us, but we are looking to grow our Safety Seminars program. So there's more exciting content to come in the near future. And I do want to thank you both for your time. If you would like to learn more about both of their work, I will send out an email in a few short days going over some helpful and useful links.